So it's a little bit after 1, and I say, what do you say we get started? So I'll just start. Welcome, everyone. We're glad to have you. This is a production of the Religion Communicators Council in combination with Communicators for Women Religious. The title of our webinar today is Divinity over Division, Communicating Spirituality in a Climate of Polarity. And we all felt like this was an important topic, especially in times like we're experiencing these days. I'm Brian Fessler. I pastor the Church of Scientology in Nashville as my quote-unquote day job, and I'm the president of the RCC. I'm really happy to be here leading this with our co-organizer and co-moderator. I'd like to have Jenny go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Heiser, Executive Director, Communicators for Women Religious. CWR is the international network. We have about 300 members, which are professional communicators and other roles that tell the voice for their congregations of women religious. So good to be with you all today. And Brian, I think I get to go ahead then and introduce Barbara and Joanne, if that's correct.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Great. Well, I'm glad to share with you the two folks that are representing CWR on our panelists today. Joanne Gallagher. Sister Joanne is a member of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Boston. And since 2001, her ministry has been to promote the mission and history and the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Boston. One of the things that's interesting, in 2023, they will celebrate 150 years in Boston. So I know she is working diligently to get everything ready for that and just promote that year of celebration. And also with us from CWR is Barbara Hecht, who is Director of Communications for the Sister of St. Joseph of Baden, Baden, Pennsylvania. And she has been with them for 22 years, working with several different leadership teams and coordinating the breadth of communications efforts for that congregation, as you can imagine. So I just wanted to welcome the two folks that'll be speaking to you on behalf of CWR today.
All right, and I'll introduce our RCC members that are with us. We've got, first of all, I'll mention Joyce Litoff. She's the Associate Director of Communications at the Baha'i National Center. She's a communications professional who's won many awards for her work. I've seen many of the awards she's received from the RCC in the past, and she's been awarded elsewhere as well. She does writing, podcasting, video work, and she sees storytelling as central to all of these efforts and has recently delved into memoir and live stage storytelling. She's ultimately responsible for the Baha'i National Center for the editing, the content of its public website and newsletter, engagement in social media networks, and media relations related to coverage of the Baha'i faith in the news. Joyce has a long history in media production, public relations position. She's worked for the for-profit sector, the nonprofit sector, and we're really glad to have you, Joyce.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
I'll introduce next Mr. Brad Pomerantz. He is the Senior Vice President for Programming and host of Jewish Life Television. He's the host of the Air, Land, and Sea program. This is a global travel series broadcasting weekly on the national cable network Jewish Life Television, which is North America's premier Jewish-themed television network. Brad is also an award winner for his work. I've seen his work in the past, and it's very good. Previously, he hosted the local edition in Los Angeles, reported and anchored for KDOC's morning news program Daybreak OC, and reported for LA City View Channel 35's news magazine LA This Week. He's been nominated for 3 Los Angeles area Emmys. We're really happy to have you, Brad.
Thank you.
Ibrahim, your phone or your camera needs to be twisted. You're kind of sideways. There we go. That works. Ibrahim Anli is a member of the RCC. He's the executive director of the Rumi Forum, which is an interfaith organization out of Washington, D.C. He's a civic entrepreneur with a career record that bridges nonprofit and academic experience. He was a visiting researcher at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 2007 and 2008. He joined the Journalists and Writers Foundation office in Ankara, Turkey, as the diplomatic coordinator in 2010. In 2013, he became the Secretary General of its Istanbul-based Forum of Intellectuals. Ibrahim was a lecturer and acting chair at the Department of International Relations and Diplomacy at Tisch International University in Erbil, Iraq. And he is currently the executive director of the Rumi Forum. So that is our esteemed panel today. And Jenny, why don't you open it up? We're ask the first question. And you can pick who you want to direct it to.
Great, thank you. I know that many times the organization may get a statement or be asked to issue a statement on a topic that really isn't relevant to what your organization, what your charism is, what your mission is, what your focus is. Joyce, can you speak a little bit about how you decide whether or not to issue a statement on whatever that topic may be when the media comes calling?
So the Baha'i faith sees itself as being a new religion, and that we have teachings that are starting now and are leading up into the future. And the World Center of the Baha'i Faith is in Haifa, Israel. And that's where the seat of the Universal House of Justice is. So that's the international governing council of the Baha'is of the world. And then each nation has a national spiritual assembly that's the governing council of that particular country. So there might be statements made by the Universal House of Justice, and there might be statements made by the national spiritual assemblies. We very often decline to talk about, well, we always often decline to talk about political topics, because we see the main mission of the Baha'i faith is to create unity in the world. And so much of our politics are divisive. And anyone who has lived through a recent election cycle knows this. And that in creating unity, you have to be listening to both sides of any story, or to all sides of any story, and respect those different viewpoints. And it's through the respect of those different viewpoints that we believe that we will be able to find solutions to our current day problems, and then move forward. So we don't really get involved in day-to-day politics.
Joyce, thank you. Barbara, can you explain a little bit about how you handle that for your congregation?
I can really appreciate what Joyce just said, because we do walk a very fine line between dipping our toes into political expressions or political leanings. So our tendency is to look at our response through gospel values, the mission of our congregation, which is uniting every dear neighbor with God. And thirdly, what really is called our charism for Catholic congregations. A charism is like a defining spirit, and we are known for our hospitality, our unity, and our reconciliation. So we try to frame all of our responses along using those elements. And it's very difficult. We even try to avoid certain words, you know, even like the Biden administration or the Trump administration. We try just to steer away from that and look at it because, as Joyce mentioned, we have to be a voice and we have to be a listener to all points of view.
That's interesting. I know in my experience with the Jewish community, Brad, the members are kind of across the boards, similar in my faith, but you have left, right, and everything in between. Do you find the people that you work with, and maybe this isn't so applicable to Jewish Life TV, but do you have to take a stance on public issues of maybe political or a hot nature?
Well, there's a joke within the Jewish community. If there are 2 Jews in a room, there are 3 opinions. So just remember that. We are the people of the book, and we like to debate. So JLTV as an institution, as a television network, we're non-political. But it's undeniable that Jews are very political. We vote disproportionately compared to our small numbers in the country. And interestingly, you know, your perception that Jews are all over the spectrum, the voting patterns suggest otherwise. I think part of the reason you believe that is because the Jews that are on the right side of the political spectrum are very vocal and very loud, to their credit. The Jews that are on the left side of the spectrum may not be as engaged. So, for example, in 2016, Clinton Kaine got 71% of the vote. In 2020, Biden-Harris got 76% of the vote. I mean, that's a huge number. And so the Democratic Party sees Jews as a critical part of its coalition, especially in certain key states like Pennsylvania, Florida, Nevada, you know, these kind of swing states.
So how do you reach that variance of audience? I mean, still 25% of the members.
Yeah. So it's tricky. I mean, we try, I desperately try to keep JLTV neutral. We are really a lifestyle network. We're not even a religious network. And when I say that, what I mean is our friends in the Christian religious television space, there's a lot of preaching and pastoring and seeking donations, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. That's just not what we are. We have Jewish grandmothers setting people up on dates, and I host a travel show, like I said, and we have some well-known television series out of Israel. We just launched Servant of the People, which is what Vladimir Zelensky, that was his launching pad to the Ukrainian presidency. And so, but, you know, I saw Joyce laugh, and I think Joyce gets it. I mean, Jews really are, we're debaters, you know, and even if we disagree with a position, just to play devil's advocate, we may take the opposite side. And that's kind of, it's very much ingrained in kind of who we are as a people, both religiously and culturally. I mean, all of you on this panel and listening surely know that Judaism is unique, not special, unique, in that, you know, we are both a religion and in a lot of ways a culture and a heritage. Joyce, jump in. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
My husband's Jewish, so I get that debate part.
Yeah. So, you know,
Barbara, is your husband Jewish too, Barbara? Wow,
yes, my husband is Jewish.
So you're an interfaith family.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
And the Baha'i faith believes that the way we are going to all get to know one another is to marry into each other's families. So
there you have
it is to promote intermarriage.
And Baha'i faith, and it's based in Israel. So there you have it.
Brian, can I jump in here?
Yeah,
I noticed a Q&A. Paul put in the Q&A, the challenge here is how we define politics and political. And Ibrahim, I don't want to put you on the spot, but that's exactly what I'm going to do. Would you care to speak to that? How do we define politics and political, and then not get into the weeds of some of that?
Yeah. So no matter how we define it, first of all, as coming from organized groups that are in an intention and in some capacity to mobilize people, we are touching the political. So that's one reality for sure in my experience. But there is still this line between the two realms. In the realm that we are coming from, call it faith community, faith inspired, or faith organized community, we are coming from a realm that touches politics because of its variety of capacities. And on the other hand, that is supposed to be function like a pulse, check the politics in the moral sense, not in the power sense. So this realm is not too far from politics, but it has its own autonomy and its own nature, its own way of operating. So that is why we don't become partisan political in the way, but maybe just to borrow an earlier remark, maybe we are supposed to be in a way lifestyle political. So
if I can jump in, I do want to say one thing, and it kind of is something that kind of is uniting right now Muslims and Jews. I can feel myself getting emotional even talking about it, because over the last 5 years, Muslims and Jews have really been under assault in America. Anti-Semitism is soaring. You know that. It's just a statistical fact. The Muslim ban was crushing and devastating to Jews, Muslims, and hopefully all people of faith. And so, you know, as we, Muslims and Jews, are trying to step back and not kind of use faith as a weapon, or just kind of be, you know, we're Americans first, always. You know, we have really been put in a very difficult situation. I don't mean to speak on behalf of you, Ibrahim, but I think you understand what I'm saying, that, you know, we've been kind of foisted to get more involved in the political process. We don't want our faith to be the reason we're getting involved, but it feels like it's becoming the motivation.
It seems like just about any faith could consider itself a minority.
Oh, no, you're right.
And I don't mean that to slight anything you just said, but really when it comes down to it, we're kind of all a minority, or else we would just be the majority. And I wondered, Joanne, if you could kind of address, you know, every faith has been persecuted. I read a Pew Research study a few years ago that Christianity was the most persecuted faith on earth. Joanne, how would you like to weigh in on that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would begin by saying you're right at what you've originally said. Every faith has been persecuted, and all. So I don't want to come out with being the Catholic persecuted people. I think that I remember one of the most exciting things about my being part of this panel was when Ginny told me that RCC was going to be part of it. And because when I first came into this ministry, I was part of RCC. You had a New England chapter. I had never heard of Baha'i faith, and I found myself in that. You know, the gentleman who was the Baha'i faith was, I believe he was from Maine, but I just found myself resonating. And you, Joyce, I said, I don't have to give this talk. You just gave it, everything I was going to say. And everything I was going to say is so interwoven. You know, we're not about diversity and division. Ginny will tell you how long I resisted even considering doing this, because I said, this isn't how we talk. And Barb covered it too, and in terms of how she mentioned that, you know, Sisters of St. Joseph, we talk about reaching out to the dear neighbor without distinction. It's in one of our core documents. And so as we're looking at the message that we're going to communicate, I look at it from three things. It is in the perspective, and one is our values that are based on whatever our core documents are, whether it's scripture or other core documents. For religious communities, it would be our constitutions, and you can weigh in on what it is for other faiths. Our, as Barbara talked about, mission, or the charism in mission. And you know, charism is a word that, you know, people don't understand. And, but it's basically, you know, how we communicate. And I believe that we, as the religion communicators, no, now I got the wrong group, you know, CWR would say that we communicate from a perspective of unifying love. And again, that's why I get so excited, Joyce. And the third is our ministry. And the ministry is all the different things that all the different people who are part of our organizations are doing. And they're the ones, how we as communicators communicate is that message. Really, it's telling the story of how these people are living out the mission and the core values of the organization. And one of the things that's kind of inspiring me right now for how we communicate is that is what Pope Francis is saying to us. He's put together this worldwide organization called a Synod on Synodality. Now, when I first heard about that, yeah, that was my, Joyce, that was my reaction too. What's that got to do with communicators? And I said, oh, yeah, fine. But then as I dug into it more, he's really, the word synod or synodality is from a Greek word that means a shared journey.
Wow.
And aren't all of us on that here today together? And it's a call to listen from a stance of vulnerable encounter and an openness to conversion. So it's not like you got your point of view over here, I've got mine, and I'm going to try to convince you of mine so you'll come over to mine. We're in it together. And that's what I learned from the Religion Communicators Council when I was, and it was even a day, probably I've been in this ministry for 21 years, but, even religious congregations I grew up in a world where, mine is better than yours, and so, but now that's not the case. We're talking about what is the charism or the mission of religious life, not just individual religious congregations. And I think the world is coming to that, the world of people who want to look to this kind of a conversation from a perspective of unifying love, not division. Diversity is another thing. Division is polarity.
Nice. Joyce is chomping at the bit. Go.
I thank you, Joanne. And I think we are emerging out of a time of tolerance. Tolerance means I don't agree with you, but I'll put up with you. And we're at a stage now that we're getting beyond that. We're moving into a stage of mutual understanding, of really learning about one another, and we are in this all together. And I think it's in the Baha'i world, we call it being a world citizen. I am a citizen of the world. It's not America first. We're not Americans first. We're citizens of the world. And we really have to get to the point where we can embrace everyone, because we are with them all.
When I was saying Americans first, I guess that was really referring to kind of the nervousness that many in the Jewish community have about suggestions of dual loyalty. President Trump famously would speak to Jewish organizations and would say things like, I love your Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. We're Americans. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not our Prime Minister. And so, and I think Joanne may appreciate, when John Kennedy was running for president, there was a suggestion of due loyalty with the Pope. And so, I'm sure you didn't mean this, but, the America First movement, if you all just watched, the Holocaust series on PBS, which was outstanding, it was quite hateful. And so when I say I'm an American first, all I mean is, just the fear of kind of suggest dual loyalty.
This is a really good example of two different meanings of the same phrase in one conversation. And I think a lot of times that leads to some of the breakdowns in communication and upsets when, everything Brad said earlier, who could disagree? Everything Joyce said 100%. Who could disagree, once we understand how they're using the phrase and take the time to figure that out. And I'm wondering, one of our watchers has posed a question here, which is right in this line, and I'd like to ask Barbara. Dee Holleran asks, so many social justice issues are addressed in religious teaching and in today's political arena. How do you address social justice without touching politics?
Good luck.
You're muted. Muted. Barbara muted herself, so she'd have to get out of that question.
She's an expert at this. I'm going to tell you.
It's very, very difficult. And I'll give you one just sort of kind of a lighthearted example. This is part of my presentation. I don't know if we're going to get to that or not, but you all remember the famous Bernie Sanders meme where he was, wearing his mittens in the cold inauguration day. And we talked among ourselves, the communication staff, like, we should join this Facebook fever. And we plopped Bernie on a bench, a springtime scene in our congregation, and said, we're waiting for spring, just like Bernie. And then we also mentioned that he was wearing eco-friendly mittens, which really illustrates our goal of living sustainably. So we get lots of very positive feedback. One commentator drew a direct line from Bernie to abortion. So all of a sudden, that's the topic on our Facebook page. And one woman started out saying, well, it took Bernie to sit on a bench to bring everybody together. And then well, how could you honor him because, you know, he's for abortion? So we all holding our breath, hot button issue. And the conversation continues, about 12 exchanges. They went from theology to abortion to Biden to Trump to the Catholic Church to the Pope and on and on and on. And then finally, the one woman realized that they had both gone to the same college and they had shared this common bond. And all of a sudden, the conversation took a detour and the tone was lowered. And they just ended up like praying for one another. That was sort of like the final message.
Wow.
And we didn't do anything to make that happen, you know, as communicators, except that we let the conversation unfold because it wasn't nasty and it wasn't personal. It was a difference of opinion. But to me, that was such a stellar example of civil discourse.
Wow.
So to get back
Religion.
to go ahead.
Oh, please complete your sentence.
Well, in terms of like the social justice, it's difficult, but like as Sister Joanne said, we go back to our values and we go back to our morals and we look to guidance from Pope Francis, who has wonderful things to say about social justice and climate change and immigration and the earth. And that's really where we draw. And this is what we really hook on. You know, these are the hooks that we use when we talk about social justice. But I'll also say Catholic sisters also have to model what they preach. So you always want to show examples of Catholic sisters in their ministries doing, you know, what they are asking everybody else to do. So that's really important because we are models and we are voices.
Well, how do you touch social justice without getting political? A shared characteristics of those, I would call maybe literalist or some fringe movements, is that they take the relationship between religion and politics just too linear, and that's a way of thinking where religion dictates your political behavior. It's not the ideal way from getting from one to the other, whereas our faith informs our choices as individuals in social and political behavior as individuals. This is, you know, recalling the travel ban. This is why many Jews, as Jewish individuals, rush to the airport, some violating their Shabbat habits. So because, you know, it precedes over the Shabbat rules according to the interpretation of some of those people. And, you know, to give maybe a broader example is Fratelli Tutti. It's a document, Catholic in origins and definitely in its author. It's a papal encyclical, but in terms of scope and message and relevance, it is universal. And it really talks very clearly, concretely about all those pressing social issues on the globe without getting political or aggressive in any way.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's where I was coming from with the synod too. You know, Fratelli Tutti, Laudato Si, which most, you know, I think a lot of people have heard of. It's relation to creation, and but this synod is doing exactly what you're saying. And Joyce, you practically quoted Pope Francis in one of your last statement, where, you know, he said, I'm looking for it on my slides. We're all in this. We're all in the same boat. We're all in this together. We're one. We belong to one common home. I think that might be from Fratelli Tutti, actually, but you know. And then this synod is about bringing. Of course, they're focusing on Catholics because, as Barbara said, we have to walk the talk if we're going to look at it in a broader sense, you know. So starting there, but the more I looked at this. All this, what I thought was church jargon about synodality, the more I realized it was the kind of a unifying stance that this and I'm realizing it more as we're talking here, that this panel is about, and that reaching out to these different, you know, not just reaching out, but being one in these different, you know, congregations of different religious perspectives is all good. And is exciting. You know, Brian's trying to say something here. Oh, he's giving you a link to the synod. Yeah.
So, as you piece together your strategic communication plan, how important is it for you to reach those outside your faith group? Do you have goals there? And then how do you go about it? And, you know, how do you make that a priority, or do you?
I know I just spoke, but
go ahead.
Go ahead, Joyce. No, I just had lunch with our justice promoter and this woman who, one of our sisters who coordinates our literacy connection and citizenship. And I said to her, this is one of the questions. Help me here, because I know we're doing it all the time. And they started listing off, you know, and one of the things, there was a stabbing here in Brighton of a rabbi, and right out in front of a Jewish day school. Right. And we were, some of you saw it on the news, yeah. We were out there on the little Brighton Center Common the next day in the pouring rain with all the other faith communities. It didn't matter. It wasn't a faith thing. We showed up to be there in solidarity with—
Joanne,
yes?
If I may, I have to tell you, for the Jewish community to have people like you show up is so important and so moving. Look, we all face our challenges, but the last 5 years have been very, very difficult for the Jewish community, from Pittsburgh to Poway to Charlottesville to Los Angeles to Brooklyn to Colleyville, Texas. And I mean, I cannot tell you, I can start crying right now when you say these, that you were there, because it is so important to us that we feel, you know.
Yeah, I'm probably really going to start crying, because when that Tree of Life, is that the name of it, Barb? Yeah. Community, the first thing I did was call Barb, because A, I knew she was in Pittsburgh, B, I knew her husband was Jewish. And then we both cried on the phone together. Yeah. And then I went to the woman across the hall from me, who is she's Jewish. She's from Russia originally. And and she helped me sit down and to offer all the Jewish synagogues, organizations, some of them are schools, in this Brighton, Allston area, or the greater Boston area, really. And I worked with her in crafting a letter that went out to all the Jewish leaders in this, from our president. And, you know, they were grateful. And the same thing happened with Ukraine. We had a prayer service here, and Barb did more, she can talk more about that. They did some things there, and I'm sure we all have. I mean, it's just part of who we are, and it's part of our justice focus. We wouldn't even, it's where you go when something happens.
But honestly, you'd be surprised how critically moving and important it is to the Jewish community, because we do, look, I don't want to overstate it, but we do feel like more than we ever have since the World War II era, that these are very difficult times for Jewish Americans. I mean, what happened with Kanye West in the last few days? I don't know if you followed this scandal, but you know, Kanye West, he has 31 million followers on Twitter. There are only 15, 16 million Jews in the world. And he says on Twitter, I'm going, he didn't say it correctly, DEFCON 3 against the Jewish community. You know, I mean, these are really
That's so
challenging
ignorant.
times.
That's so ignorant.
Really challenging times.
Joyce, how do the Baha'is reach out across faith lines? Is that even important to you?
It's extremely important to us because the Baha'i worldview is that we're going through two processes concurrently. The old world is crumbling. And because humanity in general is optimistic, that's what we see. We see all this craziness around us. But at the same time, there is a whole new world that's springing up out of these ashes. And the Baha'i faith teaches that science and religion are the same search for truth, just flip sides of a coin, the equality of women and men, social justice, elimination of prejudice, and so on and so on. And that is happening everywhere. It just doesn't make the big news story because that's what we expect. We expect the good things. So we are very concerned about reaching out just to give people hope, just to say there is good news out there.
Do you communicate differently when you're trying to reach non-members as opposed to reaching your own people, your own faith?
Yes, and part of the reason is all religious groups have their internal vocabulary, their jargon. We do a thing every 19 days called a feast. Well, a feast is just a gathering in the community. We do a fireside, which is a gathering that to teach people about the Baha'i faith. We have all these words for the things that we do, and we don't use those words when we're speaking to the public.
That's simple enough.
Mm-hmm.
Ibrahim, you do a lot of interfaith work there in Washington, D.C. Do you find your organization has a special way of communicating to try to reach people of every different faith?
Yeah, the Rumi Forum is predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly Muslim funded and Muslim staffed. But don't operate like a congregation. We are not a mosque. We are dedicated to interfaith work. That's the primary mission. And we always try to be this missing link among congregations who are in general open to the idea, but because of their understandable routine commitments and tasks and other things that consume their time and energy, cannot get involved with interfaith work. And that's where we step in, basically. And our work, quoting or referring to our namesake, Rumi, the great philosopher and man of letters. So Rumi was a jurist in his training. So in his origins, he comes from the heart of Muslim orthodoxy. And on top of that, he built an equally important layer of spirituality into his credentials. So he, as a great Muslim scholar of his age, he was one of the chief figures that led the reconciliation of legalism and spirituality among Muslims. And having succeeded that, he reconciled other communities afterwards. And his life and the core message of that experience is that being anchored into your faith by no means contradict welcoming the other. And that's pretty much our orbit and how that's pretty much what we promote. And that's why we always say our agenda is not to have one.
Wow. That's awesome. Yes, Barbara.
We reach out to different faith groups a number of ways. We have sisters who belong, or are members of interfaith groups. And we also, we reached out to the Jewish community, particularly when, the synagogue and the killings, the horrible killings that happened in Pittsburgh. And we invited them to our chapel so that we could pray with them. And we had Jewish people do their prayers for healing as well. But we also try, you know, and I think Brad mentioned, you know, it's really comforting for the Jewish community to know that other faiths are reaching out to them. But we also try to do some ongoing interactions. For example, we have something called the Unity Choir, which is like a fun get together where people of all faiths, all genders, all political leanings can come together and sing. And it sounds like really small, but it's an ongoing thing, and the sisters host it. And it just really speaks to the sisters' outreach to different faith groups. And we also have a goal right now of really trying to educate ourselves and others about racism and white privilege. So we have made intentional efforts to reach out to the Black churches in our community to also engage in common goals and common concerns. And we are part of an organization called Undivided in Christ. So we do these individual outreach, these one-time events, but we also try to nurture and engage others in a long-term basis.
That's beautiful. I'm wondering how much emphasis, this is for anybody here, interfaith work is important to all of us, reaching people of other faiths. How much is there in your communications role of conversion or trying to bring people into your faith? Is that even a consideration in your communications work, or do you leave that to the clergy and the other people in the denomination?
Judaism is a non-proselytizing faith.
Okay.
So we'll exclude ourselves from that. If you want to become Jewish, we'll take you, but we don't proselytize.
All right.
Continue.
Joyce had an answer.
So the Baha'is are non-proselytizing. So if you want to be a Baha'i, come on and join us.
Right.
But
just
we understand that the Baha'i faith has a lot to offer the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. The Pew Research always calls all those folks who have become disaffected, who have left other religions. And the most often thing we heard is, I didn't know there was a religion that teaches what I already believe when they learn about the Baha'i faith. So we very much are concerned with outreach to these folks who are looking for faith community and don't know where to go because of their histories, personal histories.
Well, Joanne, I grew up Catholic, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
Well, we are, I'm telling you, do you take Sisters of St. Joseph as Baha'i? We've been very connected to the nuns and UNS/NONES. Part of it because they really, I believe, they started here at Harvard Divinity School, and they were, one of them was at our previous, what we call a chapter meeting, a big meeting every 5 years that we look at the direction of so forth. So through that, we've had groups have come here, and as far as proselytizing goes, we don't have any expectation that those people are going to become Sisters of St. Joseph, but there's a resonance with our spirit and spirituality, and not just us as Sisters of St. Joseph, but we're in the Boston area, and we've got a lot of other religious communities, and a few of them have come and joined us as well with the group of the groups of the nuns and nuns. But as we were saying at lunch today, one of the things that has stopped a lot of this is COVID, so we haven't been doing it as we did it on Zoom for quite some time, and some of our sisters are still doing that. But the resonance with that, we call the people that are, that aren't looking for any formal kind of commitment, but somehow have a heart that resonates. That's H-E-A-R-T in Bostonian. A heart that resonates with our spirituality. We call them partners in mission, and
Yes.
And that is something that's a term that we're using, and you know it when you meet somebody, and they resonate with what you're about, and it's exciting, it's encouraging, and it's the future. When you say the world is falling apart, we're looking at that within our own little microcosm of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Boston, and how we are becoming something new and unexpected for the future. Barb, I think, did Allison give you this? Oh, you can't see it here. Unifying Love Flares. This is the focus of our 150th, and it's looking toward, who we have been and who we are becoming, and that who we are becoming is not anything we may know or expect. And so, it's, again, I say it's all good.
And it's exciting. And there's a
Very
place
exciting.
for spirit in there, for looking new ways of connecting. That's great.
I want to bring up a question that Paul posed in the Q&A. And he said that, polarization really is a problem in our society. We do have lots of folks out there with hard hearts who aren't interested in open dialogue. They just want to disagree, and that's where they're going to be. What kind of approach do you take with them? How much effort do you put in somebody who's just like, I'm not ever going to agree with you, go your own way? How do you handle that kind of situation? And that's to the group.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very difficult to move hearts and minds, or even nudge hearts and minds when you're dealing with an individual, as Paul described. We try whenever possible to continue conversations with people who have different points of view. 2 years ago, we did our magazine theme on anti-racism, and Black Lives Matter was mentioned, white privilege, and we got a pretty harshly written response from a reader and someone who knew the sisters, basically saying that, Catholics don't believe in Black Lives Matter, and how could we honor George Floyd when he had a criminal record. And you could just see, because it was capital letters, boldface, that the anger was coming through her message. Yet we did respond, not point by point, because that never gets you anywhere when you try to do, well, except for maybe the Jewish people who like to debate.
Exactly.
But it doesn't ever seem to get anywhere when you have very disparate points of view. But anyway, we emailed her and we invited her into a conversation one-on-one with our Justice and Peace Coordinator. And she never responded, but we made the attempt, we made the effort. So she probably falls into that category that, we're not going to continue to pursue this, because she's not really even opening the door to it. But we do try. We try to respond when people say they don't want to get our magazine anymore. We ask them why. I mean, we try to gather information, but it's very difficult. In fact, one of my staff persons just emailed me this quote from Eli Wiesel, who said, "We must take sides because neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor and never the tormented," which I think is pretty telling. But I think you're just not going to be able to change some minds.
Brad, how important is it to you to reach people that are like that? There's people that aren't going to change their mind.
So, I mean, anecdotally, I will say our Christian viewers are much nicer to us when they email than our Jewish viewers. I will just tell you that. I mean, they can't say enough nice things. Our Jewish viewers, you can't do anything right. You're ashamed to you're a shanda, which means ashamed to your grandmother in Yiddish. And so, I mean, I'm a little tongue in cheek, but I mean, look, the Jewish views can be very, very strong, and they've become particularly stronger in this era of polarization. I mean, you said it up front, Brian, your perception is that Jews were equally divided politically, when they're not. But that's because that there's a group of Jews, and I take nothing away from them, that are very loud, very, very loud, and feel like we've had enough, you don't like Israel, F you. You don't like what Israel does, F you. It's kind of a very, we're moving the embassy to Jerusalem, F you, and that's that. And so, that presents challenges, because you know, the Middle East is a complicated situation, and there are lives at stake, and so you know, because we're not a political entity, I don't engage that much on political topics. But I've seen some very, you know, strong opinions spoken. I can, you know, believe you me.
Right. And Joyce, what do you try very hard to move the unmovable?
We don't try at all to move the unmovable. Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, says that he comes from a long line of prophets who are ignored and ridiculed and persecuted in their own day, but history will play out. So we're playing the long game, and really we have too much work to do. We are busy building community, creating a new world in our own little spheres to take on people who aren't interested in listening.
So another question for the group.
Before that, may I chime in? What I
please do. Yes, I'm sorry.
Have respond way more comfortably when they are convinced that whatever setting they are coming into, they will not feel like political orphans, and they will not feel marginalized, or, you know, that, or this sort of label. We try to make this as clear as possible to whichever community we approach, because especially the interfaith realm, but the larger civic realm, we cannot afford it to be one where some people will think that, okay, we will never be accepted, let's not be part of that. So that's one thing I would say. So what we try to do is to reassure this tone of civility will dominate. And even with the very word interfaith, for a long time it was assumed that every community will welcome the concept with equal openness. But for some people, it's an allergic concept, and we have to find ways to this misconception. And part of the responsibility is with them, and part of the responsibility is with the interfaith community.
Thank you for sharing. So most of you have years of experience and expertise. What suggestions, what advice would you have on somebody who is either a new communicator in their faith organization or new in that role? You know, what suggestions might you have for somebody who's kind of newly coming into this? What should they do?
Listen.
Perfect, because that again is what Pope Francis is saying about the synod.
I love Pope Francis, just for the record.
That's good, because you know, if but I will say I have one of the people is listening on this call, and I can probably see the top of her head over there. I just have hired 2 new people in our office, and the wonderful thing, and you know, what would you say to new people is learn the mission and the, you know, of your organization, you know, get it in your soul. And, you know, if it's just, you know, frosting on the cake, then it's not going to come across right. It's got to be in you. And I'm finding that with the 2 people that we've hired within the last year that, you know, that are doing that. The one is, came from our college, and she said, I said, how do you know all this? Well, it was all over the place at Regis. It was always there. And I said, and she had been an intern, and I had had 3 interns before her, and none of them, I've had this conversation with her, and none of them caught the spirit the way she has, you know. And she came in one day, she does all the social media. She says, we have to respond to this. It's part of our mission. We have to respond to this. And I'm like, I don't have time. And by the end of the day, we had responded to it, and she was right. You know, it was a social media post she wanted to do for something. And the other one, it was doing our magazine, our newsletter, and she put a quote across the top or a comment that we had never had. I said, and it was perfect for our mission. I said, where'd you get this? She says, well, I've been reading your stuff. I've been listening to you. And isn't that what you're all about? And so this is coming out of their souls.
That's beautiful.
And it's all good. I mean, I keep saying it's all good, but it is all good.
Beautiful. Yeah, Barbara, what advice would you have for new communicators?
Just a funny story. I have two young women who work with me, and I'm not speaking about either one of them, but prior to them, a young woman came from a journalism background. It started working for us, and she was a great writer, and she would write something, and then she would hand it to me, and she goes, okay, Barb, now make it holy. Wow. Which meant, like, how do you work the mission into it, which I thought was, you know, pretty funny. But I think that, you know, mission, it's a hard thing to teach. It's almost something like that you absorb by being around the sisters, by being around coworkers who also want to advance that mission. But I would say to new people, talk to as many of the sisters as you can and find out what they do, the justice and peace people, the vocation people, the spirituality people, because they might tell you a story about mission that isn't just saying our mission is to unite neighbor and God to God, but actually something that really animates the mission. And I think that's how you learn it, just from being around people.
Joyce, whenever I'm around you, I not only learn about communications, but I always learn about the Baha'i faith. And I'm curious what you would advise to new communicators?
To new communicators in general, I would say to figure out how to infuse love into your message. But to new Baha'i communicators, and we're in that boat right now, again, I'm going to refer to what I said a few minutes ago about we all have our own language. We all have our own jargon. And you have to know your audience. When I'm writing to Baha'is, I can use that jargon. When I'm writing for or addressing or creating content for non-Baha'is, and I hate that word, but you know, I have to use a totally different language. So know your audience.
Yeah, Ibrahim.
We call it non-speak.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we have Scientologies as well. Ibrahim, how would you advise people new in the religion communications field?
I think part of it is to reassure. I'll just quote an example from Rumi Forum's history. In the post 9/11 America, there was this two competing narratives. Are we doomed to a clash of civilizations, or is any other avenue possible? And these two narratives were very in a kind of a harsh competition. And what Rumi Forum did, you know, we believe in dialogue as a matter of fact, and we could have spoken about the clash of civilizations idea being deterministic and, you know, disregardful of the human agency and not being ideologically not coherent, whatever, which it is. But Rumi Forum engaged in a decade-long civil diplomacy campaign, taking American leaders to Muslim-majority countries and just let them interact with their Muslim peers, visit institutions, stay with families, and just go through it themselves. And it just facilitated. So, you know, there is always an avenue of positive action, and it's our job to pursue it. We don't have to be confrontational while we try to persuade people not to be confrontational.
Beautiful. I think we're about time to draw to a close here, and we're running right up on the hour. So, Jenny, thank you for making this possible. Thank you for bringing these two lovely guests to join us, Joanne, Barbara, Joyce, Ibrahim, Brad. Thank you for being part of this. You've seen Brian Lavelle on the screen. He's with CWR. He's running some technical things in the background. We also need to thank Kathy Williams, who's with CWR and is also a Board of Governors member of the RCC, for making the introduction and helping to set up this wonderful event. The video will be available. Both organizations will make it available. And as soon as we're done, Jenny's going to send out a survey. So please, everybody, fill out the survey. RCC members, fill it out. I'll get the information. We'll take advantage of it. And that will help us to make better presentations in the future. Jenny, would you like to say any closing? I'm sorry to the panelists. I think we're running so close on time. I just see if Jenny would like to say anything, if anybody has any final remarks.
No, we're just welcome and thankful to be part of this, and look forward to a continued robust and rich relationship with RCC and CWR. So thank you.
Amen. All right. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll call this a wrap. Joanne, Barbara, Joyce, Brad, Ibrahim, thank you so much. We'll see you soon. I love you all.